Okay, this is on live now. I'm going to send this email out to you guys. Looks like I've got my answer already, so not too worried about it. I got me a new encoder, which is kind of fun, so I can work with my OBS and like actually do more complicated stuff now. So I had all the good sound and video equipment. I just never could live stream it as easily as I can now. So it's a lot easier for me to make videos like that from home. Okay. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions or comments? Anybody not understanding anything? Want a review of anything we've talked about on bones so far? Okay. Before I get started, we only have a few weeks left. I'm going to finish up bones this week. I'm only going to do section 6.4 because that's as far as I got this morning, and I don't like to get ahead in one class or behind in a class. So I like to stay right up with everything. And this morning they had a few questions that took about 20 minutes to answer. And you guys don't have any right now. So if you do, it's fine. We can do them on Thursday. So we'll do 6.4 today on how bones grow in length. And we're going to talk about how they also grow in width and the role of hormones in that as well. And then on Thursday, we will talk about how bones repair themselves. And I won't go the full hour and 15 minutes because these lectures are really kind of dense with a lot of information. And I always feel like if I overload you, we don't remember as much. It was like when I was a TA, if I had 75 students, I could learn everybody's name. 25, 50, 75, 75. And then if I had 100 students, I learned about 10 names. You see where I'm going with this. I didn't learn 75 and forget the other 25. I just didn't learn any names. And I feel like with information, we have to be careful about reaching these thresholds. It's like learning and protein denaturing. You do you do really, 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 really good, and all of a sudden nothing. The protein works faster and faster and faster, and then it dies. So I don't want to overload us with too much information. And I'm just doing what they've done in the past with this class that Dr. Scholl has been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm not trying to change it up, except I have to do a little something different. When we start talking about muscles next week, we'll have 2 weeks before the break to cover muscles. And it looks like I think a lot of you looks like you take pretty good care of yourselves. Like you work out, you're athletic, do a lot of exercise. So what I'm going to talk about with the muscles is a lot of the latest research on strength and endurance training and longevity. And I shared this with my classes today, but my wife turned me on to this podcast. And nicely, as I was walking over here, somebody told me they love my podcast, which made my day kind of, because I put a lot of work into it. I mean, I wake up, it takes me a couple of days to produce one. This is the Hubermann Lab podcast. And I think a lot of you might find this really interesting. So there's a lot of information on the web about what you should eat, when you exercise, how long you should exercise, how intense, like how many reps, what percentage of your 1 rep max, how many emails you eat. There's a lot of studies have shown that you need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if you're like me, that's okay. I want to know when I'm doing a strength exercise like bench press, how is that affecting me all the way down to the molecular level of the actin and myosin? How is that making changes to my body through chemical changes, hormonal changes, and cellular changes? In the Hubermann Lab on Spotify, Apple, wherever you go to get your podcast, I sound like a commercial. Actually, the guy looks at the most recent research out there and makes that science accessible to all of us. And you guys in A&P, I think he's completely accessible to us. I mean, you might have to rewind and look up a couple words, but he works very hard to break it down simply, but he really gets into the nuts and bolts of why you do things and giving you good parameters to work with. So for example, adipose tissue sucks, right? I'm gaining it as I get older. So, like for example, in one of his podcasts, he explained how intermittent eating or how you do a timed feeding. I try to eat between 10 and 6 now. A little bit of wobble. It's okay if I eat at 9. It's okay if I eat at 7. And he explains like the changes in your body that take place from that type of restrictive feeding and increasing your fasting times. And he convinced me, because he discussed it all the way down to the cellular level, like what happens at night to like your lysosomes and your autophagy, your lysosomes turning over your organelles at night that lead to being more efficient and increasing your longevity and reducing all of these bad things that happen to us as we age. So I endorse this. I'm not getting paid or anything. The guy has no idea I even exist, right? But I've been listening to this and I've been pretty impressed with the level of science. I've checked out his references. He's indeed using the best references out here. Hubermann is also he's a neuroscientist at Stanford. He's a professor at Stanford. He got tenure there. And if you guys don't know this, I could probably make a pretty strong case that Stanford is the best college in the world. Not in the U.S., but probably in the world. Every time I read about new studies coming out of a university, whether it's economics, paleontology, biochemistry, neuroscience, medicine, it's more or less from Stanford. Way more than Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. Sorry, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. But I see Stanford in the news way more than you guys. I'm live casting this, so I just let the world know. My brother also got tenure at Stanford, so I could be a little biased. Okay, any questions here? Yeah, I just think this is there's so many places on the web for information. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's completely wrong and misleading, and some of it is actually accurate, but you have no way of knowing how or why or if it's accurate. But this guy, he's accurate. He's spot on with the science, and that's why I like him so much. Okay, well, let's get started. Like I said, I've been having a lot of fun. I've been learning a lot listening to this podcast, and I don't learn a lot in biology these days. I keep up with what's going on, but never have I learned like so much in the last couple months. Okay. Today we're going to talk about bone growth in length and in width. Okay. So basically, longitudinal growth, we're going to grow long. Okay. So this is like, imagine a long bone. Imagine your humerus or your femur. Those are my two favorite bones to talk about. And basically, you have what is called the epiphysis here. Here's the diaphysis over here, where you got your joints. And then here you have this epiphyseal plate right here. And this is where you've got actively growing cells when your bones are growing long. And that's from about the age of 0 to about 18 to 21. But this is where new bone is added. And the little arrow is, of course, showing it going that way. So the bone's not elongating from the middle, it's elongating from the ends. Okay? It gets thick from the middle, though. Okay. So let's take a close look here. And I will see if I can move this over for the 0 people that are streaming in today. I guess they got my email. Okay. Well, normally I don't stream at this time. I stream at 9:30, but I can no longer get internet connection in the building and talking. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. You can see the bone right there. So imagine you're looking at a femur, and that bottom part is right here near the knee. Okay. So right here at the top, between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, which is the long part, there's this plate. Okay, the epiphyseal plate. And I've got one here too. And on all your long bones, there would be one here, one here, one here, one here. You guys get the idea. One right there, one right there. Good? Okay, yeah. So here is a zone of course I can't read my own. Oh yeah, reserve cartilage. This is the zone of reserve cartilage. Because interestingly, as your bones elongate, you're going to put down cartilage first. Just like when we saw with endochondral ossification. Endochondral, endo means within, chondral means like cartilage, right? And if you remember from last week, I told you we evolved from cartilaginous fishes that were the distant relatives of sharks, skates, and rays that have cartilage instead of bone. And so even to this day, we lay down cartilage first with chondrocytes and chondroblasts, and those get replaced by the osteoblast. Same thing happens in elongation. So if you're a little kid, right, and you're growing, and you hit puberty and you grew like that all of a sudden, that bone growth starts right here, this epiphyseal plate. You get your zone of reserve cartilage right here. This is closest to the epiphysis, closest to the top of the bone up there, okay? Then what happens, this right here is the zone of proliferation. Zone of proliferation, that's pretty straightforward, right? Zone of proliferation, you're proliferating, you're growing. This is where mitosis is occurring, okay? These cells are growing, and as they grow and divide, okay, they push the cells that way. So it's constantly growing this way, so that long part of the bone is extending out from that epiphyseal plate as you continually add cells. So remember, these are chondroblasts here, okay, growing and dividing, and they are laying down an extracellular matrix of cartilage. Then you have the zone of hypertrophy and maturation. Hypertrophy means they're growing larger and they're maturing from chondroblast to chondrocytes. And then the extracellular matrix at the top up here is a zone of calcification. So they start laying down and maintaining this extracellular matrix, becoming more and more calcified. As that zone becomes calcified, you cut those chondrocytes off from their blood supply. And when you do that, well, what do you think happens? You cut life off from energy, and what happens? It dies. Exactly, life dies, right? So those cells die, and now at the top, we have the diaphyseal side, which is this side right here. You have actively growing osteoblasts. So what happens at the tip of that epiphyseal plate right there, I have no pointer in here, do I? I need to get me a laser. You guys ever watch Austin Powers? All I want are some sharks with some freaking laser beams attached to their forehead. I needed my laser for it. I need to just get one. Anyway, at the very top, you've got this zone of ossification. This is where your osteoblasts, these are the cells that make bone, right? They start taking and replacing the calcified cartilage and replacing that with bone. Specifically on the outside with a circumferential lamellae. Okay, let's take one more closer look here. Let's do it again. Growth at the epiphyseal plate. Okay, so one, the chondrocytes are dividing. You can see right there, they're kind of dividing. And these arrows show that they're constantly pointing them up. And I had a student this morning made the connection that in our epidermis, in our dermis, we also have our cells are constantly growing and dividing and pushing outward. And as they get further away from their blood supply, those keratinized squamous cells end up dying and sloughing off. These cells, the chondrocytes, end up dying, but instead of getting sloughed off, they're being reabsorbed, and the extracellular matrix gets replaced by bone tissue. And like I said, if it's just below the periosteum, which is the outside of the bone, peri means around, osteum means bone, so the area is right side of the bone, they're being replaced by those, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of, I'm thinking of bone width, sorry. Anyway, these are being replaced by the osteoblasts at the yeah. Sorry, confused there. Did that confuse you? No, yes. Yeah, so what happens is the top part here, those cells get pushed into the zone of maturation. There's those chondrocytes there. They're growing, they're enlarging. And then what happens is they hit the zone of calcification. When they hit the zone of, when the osteoblasts hit, or the osteocytes hit the zone of calcification, they're cut off from their blood supply, they die, and then they get changed or replaced by bone material. And you have, of course, the osteoblasts secreting the organic matrix. So by doing this over time, our bones elongate. It's pretty cool here. Okay, now in this classroom, most of us are pretty much adults. At least I sometimes act like one. I know, it's hard. But this, so the epiphyseal plate has these chondroblasts that are constantly growing and dividing and elongating the bone. And this happens for the first few decades of your life, or at least up until the age of 15 to maybe 21. It depends. Might have even been earlier. Once your bones stop elongating, it becomes an epiphyseal line. So it grows pretty quickly. And then about the age of 12 to 15, it slows down. So, you know, a lot of kids, they have this growth spurt right when they hit adolescence, right? Right when they hit puberty. And that growth spurt is from the rapid onset of mitosis at the epiphyseal plates. Then what happens is by the age of 18 to 21, that slows down and almost comes to a stop. And when the zone of proliferation, that's where you have active mitosis, that's where those cells are growing and dividing. Once that becomes ossified, you no longer have longitudinal growth. What that means is once mitosis stops, once that's been turned to bone, there's no more actively growing cartilage. You have nothing but bone there. You just have a remnant line. No more growth. You stop growing tall. That's it. That's as close as you get. And like I said, the epiphyseal line there where that black arrow is, that's just a remnant of that plate. So that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, think about it. You know, our growth, how long do we grow a bone? How thick do we grow a bone? It's all about timing. And in fact, you know, I teach a class called General Vertebrate Zoology, which I talk about a lot. I absolutely love that class. But the biggest difference between you and a mouse or a whale is timing of your bones. Timing. It all comes down to timing. Because we're all made up of very much this exact same things. Pretty cool, isn't it? So now we got to wonder, you know, what causes puberty? What causes those bones to grow fast or grow slowly? Any questions? Okay, so that's growth in length. That's, of course, occurring at the epiphyseal plate. Basically, that growth in length stops around the age of 18 to 21. And if you're like my mom, I hope she's not watching in. I think she said she reached her current height when she was in the 6th grade and basically stopped growing. So some people grow very fast and stop growing as early as the age of 12, whereas others, I've seen guys in college in their freshman and sophomore year grow a few inches. Okay, any questions? All right. I know this is a rough time to be in class, isn't it? When I was in high school, I had a hard time at that. After lunch, 3:30, I was ready to. We won't even talk about how many times I fell asleep in my Spanish class after lunch. It was so bad they had to talk to my mom about it, who's the head science teacher. I know, awful, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so bones grow long, bones grow wide. You know, and if I teach another class in plant and animal form and function. And tree physiology, when trees grow tall, they elongate. That's called primary growth, which is our longitudinal growth in bones. And trees also grow wide and lay out those rings. That would be appositional growth in bones, whereas in trees we call it secondary growth. So here's the thing. Bones grow long from the tips, from the ends. Okay, so they're not growing long from the middle. However, appositional growth, this is growing wide. This does occur in the middle of the bone, starting with the periosteum. Now recall, you've got the length of your bone, that's the length of it here is at diaphysis. That tissue surrounding the outside of the bone, that tissue layer on the outside of the bone is called the periosteum, and it has osteoblasts in it. Remember, there are several major types of blood cells: osteoclasts, which absorb bones, osteoblasts, which grow bone, and then osteocytes that maintain bone. And osteocytes, of course, are mature osteoblasts. Okay? All right, so appositional growth does occur right down the whole middle of the periosteum. So it's that layer right on the outside of the bone, and you've got your osteoblasts, and they lay down new bone. Now, those osteoblasts, right along the edge here, you can see the bone getting thick, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay? They are not necessarily creating a new osteon. Okay, lots of words here. Remember, we have dense bone, spongy bone. Do you guys remember osteons? Need a refresher? Okay. This will just take 1 second here to pull this up. I thought you guys might want a refresher. Hey, if I ever, oops, wrong week. If I ever start talking about stuff and you just start hearing words and those words aren't meaning anything to you, like if I say osteon and it just like I don't remember what an osteon is, that's okay. Don't hesitate to ask me to review something if I need to, okay? Because man, there's a lot of terminology, a lot of structure in here, and let's not hesitate to review. So I don't mind one bit reviewing this stuff. Okay, just remember, the length here is the diaphysis. On the outside of this is the periosteum. This is the epiphysis, and this is the epiphyseal plate up until about the age of 21 or younger, depending on whenever you stop growing tall. This is the epiphyseal line, but this is the area of elongation right here. You got one there, and you got two up there, right? And you can see them. And bone growth is going to be this way. And then when we grow thick, this is periosteum. Bone width is going to grow out like that. Okay, and then really quickly, let's review the bone cells. Let's see here. Yes. On the outside, the thicker, dense part of your bone, dense bone. This structure here is called an osteon, okay? And these concentric circles, those are the lamella, okay? And then inside of here, you've got all kinds of collagen fibers that are running against each other. Then you have your central canal that has your blood vessels and a nerve cell in there. And then these little structures right there, those are the lacuna where your osteocytes are found. And these lacuna are connected through little canals, caniculae or whatever they, I can't pronounce it, canaliculi or caniculi. They just call them canals. I'm sorry that I can't pronounce it correct. Caniculi. Canal. Well, at any rate, that's where the osteocytes in the lacunae, which are in the holes, the osteocytes are found, and they have these little dendrites that come out, these little canals that come out and connect those osteocytes together, and that's the caniculate canals. Are we good? Okay, and then, so this is the osteon. So when I talked about, I keep when they say secondary growth. Appositional growth, and you're growing here. This is your periosteum out here on the inside. This, of course, would be the endosteum here, which is spongy bone in the middle. What's happening as you're growing wider is you're laying down the extracellular matrix of the bone, right? And you're laying down the lamella. These concentric circles are the lamella of the osteon. During appositional growth, you're not creating lamella immediately. I'm so sorry. You're not creating osteons immediately. You are creating lamella. You're creating these circumferential lamella here. And then what will happen is, and I'm not sure how this happens, but what does happen is these circumferential lamella that are getting laid down by these osteoblasts, they will get transformed into osteons. And osteons, of course, are also being turned over as well by the osteocytes and osteoblasts and the osteoclasts. Osteoclasts, of course, are taking them down. Osteoblasts are budding new ones, and osteocytes recruit osteoblasts. That's a lot, isn't it? Are we good? Any questions here? Is that refresher helpful? Yeah. Never hesitate. If I'm starting up here and I'm lecturing and I'm throwing words out at you that you don't know, communicate back to me. Just let me know. Let's talk. We can talk about it, okay? Because if not, I'm going to assume you know it. Okay. Yeah, there's your total osteon there. All right. So let's get back to here. So you can see the bone is growing larger. It's growing larger because the osteoblasts on the outside of the cell where the periosteum is are actually laying down circumferential lamella. They're laying down extracellular matrix, and those circumferential lamella will then get reworked into the osteons. Okay, now if you also notice, you have your medullary cavity in the middle. And as you notice, as the bones grow wider and wider and wider, that cavity also grows well. And that tells you something. That tells you that there is some bone getting reabsorbed. So as this gets thicker and thicker, as the bone gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it's getting thicker, but not like thicker from here on out. The medullary cavity also increases in size. So on the inside, where you have the endosteum, the osteoclasts. The osteoclasts are the cells that reabsorb bones. Are we good? So as you're growing thicker, the osteoclasts on the inside are absorbing bones. The osteoblasts on the outside are putting down bone. Okay? Any questions? Yeah. Okay. And I went into that there as well. Appositional growth doesn't make new osteons. It makes circumferential lamella, and those get worked into the actual osteon of the dense bone material. And then this is just showing here, this is the outside of the bone. This is the periosteum. This is where you have the osteoblasts here are growing new bone. And of course, osteocytes are in the little tunnels or little housing there called the lacuna. Okay, and then you have the endosteum on the inside. Here's your osteoclast. Remember, these are cells that were formed by mergers of other cells. That's why they're multinucleated, and they have these, it's kind of rough on the inside or on the bottom side to increase surface area. And that's where they're absorbing bone. And this actually comes in really important when we start talking about bone maintenance on Thursday, what they're doing. Okay. All right. Now here's one difference between longitudinal growth and appositional growth. Once your bones reach the length of what they're going to be, and the epiphyseal plate ossifies. Those cells that were doing mitosis, those chondroblasts, are gone. That means your bone will no longer grow anymore. It's done. That's the longitudinal growth. It's not going to grow anymore. You're not going to get taller. However, you can still have appositional growth. The bones can still get thicker after they stop growing long. Okay? And that happens especially in men or in women too, depending on what you're doing to yourself, including exercise. And sometimes things go wrong. Dwarfism, one of them is called achondroplasia. Achondroplasia is a form of dwarfism where your bones don't elongate correctly, and it's caused by defective genes that produce an abnormal growth factor or a receptor in the cartilage. So I told you earlier that growth is about timing. And I said, I went so far as to say like the difference between you, a mouse, and a whale is mostly timing. Now, that timing is you've got these cells. You've got osteoclasts that are breaking down the bone, and you've got osteoblasts growing bone, and you've also got the chondroblasts growing and lengthening bones as well. So that means they are receiving chemical signals that are saying grow and divide or not to grow and divide. Okay? Now, to receive that chemical signal, you have to have a receptor. You have to be dialed into it. And if you don't have that receptor, you don't receive the signal and you don't grow and divide. Does that make sense? So here you've either got defective growth hormone or you've got defective receptors. Either way, this is inheritable. It could be a new mutation. It could, like I said, be a problem with your receptor or the growth hormone itself. All right, here's my public service message. You guys ever seen those puppies with absurdly short legs? Don't ever buy one. Don't ever get one. I mean, you could rescue one if you need to. That's totally fine. But definitely don't buy one from a breeder. Those dogs have achondroplasia. That's what causes those stumpy little legs in those dogs. That's why the big body and those stumpy legs. And unfortunately, achondroplasia, because their bones didn't lengthen correctly, can lead to like health problems in these dogs and cause them pain throughout their life, just like it does in humans. And we think that it's cute to have dogs with short, stumpy legs, even though it's not good for them. And I think that's very cruel of humans to grow something for pure vanity reasons because we think it's cute, even though it's detrimental to them. And the same goes for dogs with very flat faces. We seem to have an obsession with dogs with flat faces. And you can hear those dogs breathing. They are under respiratory distress. They are not healthy. And breeding dogs with flat faces shortens their life and it makes them basically have trouble their entire life. And we do that for solely like because we think it's cool. And it's actually pretty cruel. That's my public service message for the day. Get irritated when I see that stuff. Mutts. Except I have a German Shepherd, but my neighbors gave it to us. So what can you do? All right. Any questions here? Yeah, avoid animals with achondroplasia. It's not nice. All right, and of course, you guys, I get to talk about Game of Thrones twice, or actually 4 times today. So my other class, I was talking about steroids, so I showed the mountain from Game of Thrones, where he was squatting like 825 pounds, but he weighed like 400. And I was like, I had 600 pounds at 185. Pound for pound, dude. But Tyrion Lannister was played by Peter Dinklage, who does have dwarfism. He took the role because it was not your typical role for a dwarf, which was pretty cool. And of course, if you saw the show, it's not family friendly. If you don't like sex and violence, don't watch it, or at least don't watch the last season. Yeah, the last show sucked. But he actually stole the show. He was by far the best character on there. He got all kinds of awards for it. And it was also big because it was one of the few roles where you have a dwarf that's actually not playing a stereotypical short person character. Okay. When do we grow? How thick do we grow? How fast do we grow? How big do we grow? A lot of this comes down to the role of hormones in bone growth. Okay, so one of the really important hormones is called growth hormone. We have it throughout our life. It comes from the anterior pituitary gland. And basically the growth hormone, these things cause cells to divide more rapidly. So if you have an excessive growth hormone, you grow bigger. If you have less growth hormone, you grow smaller. In the 1970s, growth hormone was first extracted from farm animals, and a few bodybuilders would take it. And before it was refined, it made everything grow big. So that you would see them with gaps in their teeth because their skull is getting larger and everything. So it increases, of course, bone growth, muscle growth, you name it. And there are reasons why you would want to take growth hormone if you need to have certain cells grow more quickly. But it definitely affects bone growth. Okay, the other one is testosterone. This is the male sex hormone. You guys are familiar with it. And it has a really pronounced effect on bone growth. So it causes appositional growth, causes the bones to grow wider. So the bones grow thicker in males because you're having more calcium deposition than you do in females. That is one of the reasons why males are larger than females and not just like taller, but also heavier. And part of the reason why we are stronger, we're also building on more muscle as well. It increases the rate of mitosis in the epiphyseal plate. And so when a young boy reaches adolescence, reaches puberty, those testosterone levels increase rapidly. That increases the mitosis in that epiphyseal plate, increases longitudinal growth. Kid goes through a growth spurt, grows 6 inches in a year or more. It's pretty crazy. It also accelerates the closure of the epiphyseal plate, causing it to become ossified, which also stops growth, which is interesting because in the beginning it speeds it up, right? It speeds up the growth, but in the end it ends up slowing it down. It ossifies it, and that's what part of the reason why males stop growing around 18. And there's wiggle room around that too. Some guys stop at 15, some guys stop at 20. I basically stopped right around 17, I think. Any questions? All right. If you've got testosterone having an effect, estrogen has an effect. Estrogen also increases longitudinal bone growth. Estrogen also causes growth spurts. So when young women are hitting adolescence or puberty, young girls, what happens is they go through a growth spurt as well. And also estrogen, think about this, this is very important. Estrogen inhibits osteoclast activity. Okay? It inhibits osteoclast activity. What that means is if I'm growing my bone, all right, either long or thicker, you've got osteoclasts that are absorbing the bone. So as you're inhibiting osteoclast activity, you're slowing down the rate of those cells. You are slowing down the rate of absorption. So as estrogen levels increase, your bones are growing longer, and the rate of reabsorption is also decreased, so the bones can grow thicker as well. Are we good? Okay, now, that's why women also get a growth spurt. However, estrogen accelerates the closure of the growth plate, of the epiphyseal plate, faster. That's why women often stop growing before men. So like my mom, she's in the 6th grade and she's 5'5.5". She's very proud of that 5'5" and that 5.5, that 0.5. Very proud of that. And she stopped growing in the 6th grade, 12 years old. So the estrogen caused that epiphyseal plate to ossify, and it became an epiphyseal line. And there was no more actively mitotically active cells in those bones. Good? Or chondrocytes, I should say, chondroblasts, I should say. Well, that also leads up to a problem faced by women in older age. You probably can start to guess what that might be. We're talking about bones, and as women age, and men too, we can all suffer from osteoporosis. Think pores, osteobone, your bone becomes brittle and porous. Okay, so it can happen to all of us, but in women, what happens is as you hit menopause, estrogen levels decrease. They start going down. They're declining. And as they decline, those estrogen levels for 40 years, basically, stupid spam calls. Shut up. Those the rate of bone reabsorption to bone growth, to bone, the osteoclast and the osteoblast are in this perfect balance your whole life. Then at menopause, your estrogen levels start to decline. And when they decline, those osteoclasts are no longer as inhibited. So that upsets the balance of the osteoblast to the osteoclast. That upsets the balance of building new bone to absorbing bone. So what happens after menopause is with the increased activity of osteoclasts, after menopause, estrogen goes down, you start losing bone more quickly. And that leads to brittle bones and osteoporosis in women after the age of, well, whenever menopause hits. And that can vary depending on your genetics. So, fortunately, there's some things that can be done about that. Diet, you of course need calcium in your diet, you need protein in your diet, and you need vitamin D in your diet. Protein to help build all the collagen and all the organic matrix of it, right? You need calcium, of course, for the hydroxyapatite, and you need vitamin D to help you absorb calcium. The other thing, exercise. Exercise puts stress on your bones, okay? And when you put stress on your bones, you increase the osteoblast activity. And by increasing the activity of your osteoblast, you start putting down more bone. So the simplest thing to do, walk. Walking is, if you can't do anything else, go for a fast walk. Fast walking is very, very, very important. And I'm not talking about being reckless, just the quicker you can pick up your pace, the better you are, even if you can only do it for a few minutes. But even if you can just get like 20 minutes in, that level of activity a day is helpful. I mean, very helpful for your longevity. And it will also put stress on your bones. The other thing that you can do, in addition to diet, is exercise, the walking and weightlifting. And I know not everybody not everybody likes to lift weights, right? I hear a lot of people say they just hate the scene at the gym. So there's lots of ways to do this, but if you can do anything where you can put tension on your bones, on your body for muscle building, it's like 5 sets a week. That will not only increase your strength, which is actually very important, not necessarily increasing muscle size, but increasing the strength of your bones of your muscles, because as we age, it's all downhill, right? From here on out, guys, it's all downhill for you guys. But you can slow that downhill a lot. You can lower the slope, flatten the curve, so to speak. Not flatten the curve. You can lower the slope. And by also making your muscles stronger, you're also putting stress on your bones, and you make the osteoblasts work more, and you thicken up your bones. And you're less likely to have osteoporosis. Okay, any questions? And guys, it's important for us too. Guys do get osteoporosis. Just not as much because we don't have the estrogen. We have the testosterone that made them thicker and bigger. Okay, any questions here? Well, I always seem to do my second lecture a little bit more quickly, probably because I ramble a little bit less and you guys didn't have quite as many questions as the earlier class. But I'm going to stop here and I'm going to finish this chapter on Thursday. And we're still right on schedule for what's been scheduled in the previous 5 or 6 years of this class. And like I said, when we start talking about muscle, I'm going to add a lot more information that I think you guys will like. Okay, Anything you want me to review or redo again, or anything you have questions on? Okay. Like I said, just don't ever hesitate to ask me at the beginning of class if you want me to review a topic or something that you're not understanding. And I guarantee if you ask it, half the people in the class are like, thank you. All right. I will see you guys on Thursday.